Hello, welcome to the Muslim Debate Initiative's discussion, Is Hell Just? This event is hosted by the Muslim Debate Initiative, which is an intellectual, political and theological initiative formed by experienced Muslim researchers, debaters, speakers, and aimed at encouraging inter-community debate, discussion and dialogue. MDI believes that it's only through frank and open discussion and debate that a deeper understanding can be gained, relations between different communities be improved, and hopefully the breaking down of prejudice and false conceptions. It is with this in mind that we'd like to invite our speakers to present their cases, but first let me introduce them to you. On my right is Farhan Qureshi. He was born and raised in the United States of America to an Ahmadiyya or Qadiyani family. At the age of 17, citing inconsistencies in the Ahmadiyya tradition and spiritual experiences at a Sunni masjid, Farhan converted to Sunni Islam. Farhan would primarily involve himself in dawah work and debate with Qadianis defending the doctrine of the finality of prophethood, but expanded his efforts to Christians after a Qadiani he knew converted to Christianity, namely a certain Nabil Qureshi, who is no relation. The two would engage in what would be both of their first debates in 2006. After 10 years of practicing as a Sunni Muslim, in 2011, Farhan would leave Islam altogether due to his struggles with the doctrine of hell and evil. Farhan claims to be an agnostic and claims to maintain a positive attitude towards Islam and Muslims, saying that it is a beautiful wisdom tradition, but no longer believes Islam is the ultimate reality behind our existence. Currently, Farhan works in a mental health establishment and has done so for 4 years. He attends a Unitarian Universalist congregation in Washington, D.C., that consists of atheists, humanists, agnostics, theists, and the like. While maintaining his position as an agnostic, he is also learning Eastern spirituality from a Buddhist monk and a Hindu guru. Farhan continues to engage in debates and speak at campuses, churches, and radio programs against exclusivity doctrines, particularly Christian and Muslim exclusivity claims. Farhan also advocates spirituality for non-theists. Examples of this include his engagement with an atheist crowd at Skepticamp DC, held at the University of Maryland on the topic of spirituality and esotericism, a debate with a senior pastor of the Cross Valley Chapel in Frederick, Maryland, on the doctrine of hell, and on WFMD radio, and upcoming agreed upon debates with Christian and Muslim apologists in the United States. He is also a contributor to Faith Freedom International, where he writes articles on topics related to Islam. Abdullah, on my left, Abdullah Al Andalusi, is a former Christian of Portuguese descent, as you can tell. Abdullah embraced Islam at a young age after a period of study that started when he was 10 years young. He continued to study Islam in depth ever since. Abdullah has had a long experience of working in the Muslim community, and his activities involve studying and talking extensively on Islamic revivalism, theology, philosophy, the philosophy of science, sociology, anthropology, and political philosophy, full stop. Abdullah has delivered talks throughout the UK at community centres, universities, colleges, and appearances on various TV programmes. He has also engaged in a number of debates with atheists, secularists, and Christians on a variety of topics. He is currently a member of the Muslim Debate Initiative, a public discussion forum that promotes open dialogue and debate. Okay, I'll come along to the format for the evening, which is as follows. Each speaker will open with a 20-minute presentation, and Farhan on my right will begin his presentation first of all. Then there'll be 7-minute rebuttals each, followed by a 30-minute open panel discussion where I will move backwards and let the two guests have a civilised discussion about the issues. Followed by your time, the audience, so to speak, 30 minutes question and answer session, and then matters will be concluded with a traditional 5-minute summary each. And I'd like to explain a bit about the rules this evening, because there are some rules. No one shall shout, jeer, or disrupt the speakers while they are speaking. Anyone who wishes to make comments should save them for later, during the audience participation session, the Q&A session. Applause is allowed at the end of each speaker's discussion. We would like to remind everyone that in accordance with the Islamic principles of the Muslim Debate Initiative and the commonly understood principles of the etiquette of discussion, that we should respect everyone's right to hold opinions and express them, even the most unpalatable ones, as long as they are expressed sincerely and for intellectually serious purposes, and not gratuitously and in a disrespectful fashion. I hear that today's event could be the first time that the concept of hell has been debated in the UK in the context of Muslim beliefs. And we hope you enjoy this evening and gain a deeper insight into the fascinating topic of the justice of hell. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Farhan, to speak for 20 minutes. Farhan Qureshi.
Thank you, and peace be with you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Welcome, Islam.
Now,
we can start the timer.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, first and foremost, let me go ahead and thank Muslim Debate Initiative and Brother Abdullah Al Andalusi for their invitation, for their generosity, for their hospitality, and their kindness. They demonstrated nothing but that, and it's appreciated from the depths of my heart. And I also want to share my admiration to Brother Abdullah Andalusi for discussing such a provocative and controversial topic. In a matter of fact, as far as I understand it, on a public level, the doctrine of hell has never been questioned or debated, not just in the UK, but as far as I'm concerned, never from a Muslim perspective. And so I do show him, the gratitude and in his willingness to discuss such a provocative debate topic. So in order to bring forward my presentation, what we're gonna have to do is establish some facts, and perhaps some facts that we all can agree on. And what are the psychological and empirical implications of these facts? And also, how can we deduce philosophically the reasoning that I'm going to present to you today? So let's get some basic facts out of the way that I think that we all can agree on. None of us have any choice or control over, for example, what time period we were born in, what part of the world we were born in, who our parents would be, what parenting styles they would implement, what they would teach us, whether we would be male or female, the genes that we inherit from our parents, the brain chemistry that we have, and just in generally the internal mechanisms that go on in our bodies. What experiences we would have in the predetermined environment that we're being brought up in. We're talking about a social construct here. We're talking about culture here. We're talking about, again, all of the things that I've mentioned from time period to part of the world. All of this, no control at all. And this has psychological implications. What do I mean by that? All of these different factors will impact the behaviors that we exhibit, the choices that we make, and the choices that we are limited to, and our overall perception of reality as we know it. In psychology, and psychologists will posit that it is our nature and our nurture that impact and influence and most of the time determine the way that we perceive the world. Nurture, of course, being the environment, and nature being the genetics of what's going on. And of course, genes not only have to do with what we look like externally, but also the internal mechanisms and the chemistry that goes on both in our bodies and in our brains. And all of this will impact, again, what? The behaviors that we exhibit, the choices that we make, and the perception of reality that we have. So in other words, if you were born in the 1860s in Confederate America or the 1930s in Nazi Germany, and you were Adolf Hitler with his brain chemistry, with his genetics, in his environment, with his parenting styles, in his experiences, in his predetermined circumstances, more than likely you would have done everything that he did. If you were born as Abu Jahl, the enemy of the Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah, you would have rejected the Prophet to his face. Philosophically, this is called the doctrine of determinism. And a matter of fact, most science, if not nearly the vast majority of scientists, not just psychologists, are determinists. Many of the great classical philosophers, if they're not hard determinists, they're compatibilists or soft determinists. And there's a general agreement and consensus amongst the vast majority of rationalists and empiricists that determinism is a fact. Now, where does free will come into play? And what do we mean by free will? Philosophically, it's been defined as, and this is a definition of Peter von Inwagen of Notre Dame, the ability or the power to sometimes do otherwise than we normally would. Now, from a psychological standpoint, we would question, why would we do otherwise? What antecedent circumstances, causal circumstances, would make us want to do otherwise than we normally would? So on both sides of the spectrum, what we normally would do and what we would do otherwise have antecedent, subconscious, and unconscious forces behind them. And so the question that I'm going to, the first question that I would ask Brother Abdullah to concede to is determinism a reality that we are facing? Is the free will that we think that we are experiencing at least partially an illusion? At least partially an illusion. Meaning that we do not have as much control as we think we do. And right now, the only thing that I'm talking about is again, human behavior, the things that we do. What about indoctrination? What about brainwashing? What about human conditioning? B.S. Skinner was a hard determinist, and he was a psychologist, and he formulated the operant conditioning model through his experiments. And Pavlov was, of course, classical conditioning. And what conditioning is, particularly of the human psyche, is that if you are taught one thing for long periods of time and you experience positive rewards for a consistent amount of time, that essentially it becomes second nature to you. So what I'm saying to you is this. The followers of religions, particularly conservative dogmatic religions, they perceive positive experiences. They become attached to their identity derived from these experiences. They fall prey to what is known in social psychology as confirmation bias, which means they dig themselves deeper and deeper and deeper into their identity and their attachment to their identity and an attachment to their thoughts and their beliefs. And this becomes second nature to them. And so when I come to you with evidence that is contrary to what you believe, it doesn't matter what your beliefs are. If you're a victim of confirmation bias, and we all are, but if you become, the reality of being a victim to this is this: if I come to you with evidence, the first impulse is to react adversely to the evidence that I'm giving to you, regardless of how convincing it is intellectually. The idea is that you're going to spontaneously deny what I'm saying because of that conditioning, because of that indoctrination, because of that brainwashing element that's there. And so when we think about, for example, Harold Camping, his followers were crying. They were crying when they thought that the world was going to end on May 21st, 2011. When the plane struck the towers on 9/11, that was due to indoctrination. That was due to brainwashing. And what we're talking about here is a psychological concept. So with this determinism in mind, this reality of determinism in mind, the next question would be, well, what about criminals? How do we deal with criminals? If everyone is determined to do what they do, then how do we deal with criminals? When we think about a murderer, a rapist, whatever crime that you can fathom, the worst of crime, think about the worst crime that you can think of. We can't look at it as an isolated situation. Rather, there has to be a plethora of predetermined circumstances that unfortunately guided the person to that psychological disturbance. And hence, what I'm arguing to you today is that that the criminals are not accountable for their actions. So how do we deal with them? Well, all of neuroscience, at least all of the neuroscience that I'm familiar with, there might be some articles that Brother Abdullah wants to present that are contrary to what I'm about to say. But the articles, especially the Joshua Green and Jonathan Cohen study that was done in New Jersey, which is most commonly, when talking about the free will determinism debate and the impact of neuroscience in the modern era, it's the most common study that's cited. And in it says, we argue that neuroscience will probably have a transformative effect on the law, despite the fact that existing legal doctrine can, in principle, accommodate whatever neuroscience will tell us. In other words, that the criminal justice system and the law systems that we have today, even though they can accommodate what we have, the evidence that we have today, despite the ability for the legal system to accommodate that, we believe that there's going to be a transformative effect in the coming years. This change in moral outlook will result not from the discovery of, well, hang on. We foresee and recommend a shift away from punishment aimed at retribution in favor of a more progressive, consequentialist approach to the criminal law. And there's some key philosophical terms used here. Retribution versus consequence. Retribution is that the person deserves the punishment that they're receiving. Consequence, on the other hand, is that the person is a product of their circumstances, in that something needs to be done from a criminal justice model as a consequence to their behavior. So in other words, the person who commits the murder, the person who commits the rape, the person who commits any of these atrocities that we see, what the idea in the consequentialist model is that we take them away from society in order to protect society from them, and to rehabilitate them, treat them because they're a product of their unfortunate circumstances. So there's a difference between retribution here and consequence when dealing with when dealing with the criminal. And this is the type of transformative effect that it's going to have on our criminal justice systems throughout the world in the coming years. This is what Green and Cohen are predicting. Now, determinism, I've mainly dealt with the empirical facts, right? The psychological effects of human conditioning, indoctrination, brainwashing, predetermined circumstances, the causal factors to our behavior. But I think since we're dealing with not just the doctrine of hell here, we're dealing with Jahannam, specifically the doctrine of Jahannam as it's taught in Islam. We can also bring forward another form of determinism, or another idea of determinism, which is theological, right? The debate that has gone on since the very outset of Islam. And as a matter of fact, the Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually forbade people from talking. Not forbade, but he discouraged people from talking about this topic because it could lead to what? It could lead to kufr, possibly. And that is the very reason, from an academic standpoint, why we should look at it. Is why would we want to hide from the reality of the situation? But from a theological perspective, we're dealing with the omniscience of the divine, meaning that if God is al-alim, meaning the all-knowing, then He knows what we will do before we even do it. And of course, this is, according to Islamic theology, this is written in a book called Al Mahfuz, meaning that this was written before even the universe was created. Everything that you will do was written before you were even created. Now, there's a little bit of a dispute between the Jabaris and the Jahmi school of thought that's no longer around. Although I have a ton of respect for Jam bin Safwan alayhi salam, who's a critical thinker, I think, in the early periods of Islam, completely deviant according to mainstream Sunni schools of thought. But he argued the Jabr idea, that everything is in fact determined, and that we don't really have any choice. But then you have the Qadari, not to be mistaken from the Sufi tariqa, but it was and the Asharis kind of adopted this idea, as well as did most of the Sunni schools of thought. That God is the al-Khaliq, he's the khalq of the action, but the human being, the person, is the muqasid, the qasb, meaning the inquisitor of the action. And so they try to place some compatibilism here. But either way, when you look at it theologically, God has written down in this book what you will do before you even do it. In other words, you are determined to do everything that you do in this life. And, well, now I want to get, how much time do I have? 14 minutes, okay. But now I want to get to the crux of the matter, the doctrine of hell itself. And what I'm going to do, first and foremost, let me go ahead and talk about cruel and unusual punishment. Okay, now, cruel and unusual punishment, it falls within the 8th Amendment of the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the British Amelioration Act, the Charter of Fundamental Right of the European Union, Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted by the United Nations and General Assembly, and so on. And cruel and unusual punishment means that we cannot use any form of torture as a form of punishment because it would be unethical. And so what the big question that I would have for Brother Abdullah Al Andalusi is hell, as it is described in the Quran, would you define it as cruel and unusual punishment? And if not, why would you not define it as cruel and unusual punishment? But what do we mean by, what are we talking about when we talk about the doctrine of hell according to the Quran? Let's go ahead and dive into the Quran and read some verses. Okay, so, O you who have gone astray and denied, you will surely eat of the trees of Zaqqum, then you will fill your stomachs with it and drink boiling water on top of it, and you will drink like diseased camels raging with thirst. Chapter 56, verses 51 and 56 through 56. Then they will taste of it a boiling fluid and a filthy fluid of pus and blood, and other penalties of a similar kind to match them. It will be given pus. They will be given pus to drink. He will gulp it, but will hardly be able to swallow it. And death will come to him from every place, yet he will not die. If they call for relief, they will be relieved with water like molten brass that will scald their faces. How dreadful to drink! How evil the resting place! Yokes will be tied around their necks, and the chains that they will be dragged into boiling water. Then in the fire they will be burned. The length of these chains is 70 cubits. A fire which will encompass them like the walls and roof of a tent will hem them in. They will cry out for help, but will be granted scalding water like melted brass that will scald their faces. Boiling fluid will be poured on their heads, which will melt what's in their bellies and skins. For them will be hooked rods of iron. Whenever in their anguish they try to escape from hell, they shall be dragged back. That the skin that will be burned will completely burn through, and new skin will replace the old skin. And so there are verses upon verses upon verses in the Quran talking about gratuitous torture and cruelty. So my first objection is torture. With an omnibenevolent, all-loving God, and an omnipotent, all-powerful God that we're talking about, that He created a system where this would happen. I hope that you guys are picturing the cruelty of what a system this God has created. And all for what? Thought crime. You choosing the wrong theology. You not conceptualizing reality according to how 7th century Arabs conceptualized reality. My parents were Qadiyani, and I had to come to this realization that they would be burned in hell. There was a lecture that Hamza Sortsis, who's another apologist, he was weeping because he believes that his parents are going to be tortured. Weeping. And this was a video that was produced to inspire Muslims. It made me sick to my stomach that this man had the audacity to believe that his parents deserve to be tortured. Let alone for eternity. Endless torture. Torture that never ends. Continuous, pointless torture.
2 minutes.
And so the last argument that I want to make in the last 2 minutes is the notion of infinite, endless torture for finite crimes. No matter how much crime or how much evil you commit, that still cannot amass an infinite amount of punishment. Philosophically speaking, we're talking about proportion. Whether the crime meets the punishment, whether there's proportion between finite crimes and infinite punishment. And so that's going to be my last argument, is that it's not proportionate, that it's extreme, that it's cruel, that it's disgusting, and that you cannot be morally serious for a minute. You can't be morally serious for a second and believe in this doctrine. There has to be some other explanation. There has to be some other way. Thank you.
Supposed to introduce you. Thank you anyway. Thank you. Now I invite Abdullah to give his presentation for the next 20 minutes. Kind of figures on and off.
I don't know yet. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على النبي الكريم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين وصحبه الصالحين. I'd like to thank MBI, Farhan Qureshi, and our guests for attending this event, and I hope you'll find it interesting and enlightening. I chose this subject because I think as Muslims we should know why we believe what we believe and be able to demonstrate what we believe is true and accurate. I will demonstrate that today's debate is not about any real intellectual objections, but purely emotional objections. God is justice, and there is no higher values that transcend him. So this debate is meaningless to a theist. However, what can be discussed is whether God is consistent with his treatment towards creation. When God declared in the Quran he will not be unjust, this means that no one will be dealt with in an unjust manner. And it is the veracity of this promise from the Islamic perspective that I will demonstrate today, inshallah. The main objections to hell are typically, is it just for God to punish by means of pain, or what they call torture, in the afterlife? Is it just for God to maintain punishment for eternity, or what they call infinite punishment? We'll discuss that. Is it just for God to judge and punish humans in the first place, which I think relates back to this determinism discussion. In light of this, I will demonstrate three things. The right of God to hold humans to account. It is fair to hold human beings to account, i.e. human beings can be judged. And the justice of the recompense of hell. Now, the right of God to hold human beings to account. So why, can God even hold us to account in the first place? Is this fair? Well, firstly, I want to expose an underlying bias behind this discussion. This bias comes from liberalism, which believes that man is totally free of any control, that man's purpose is to enjoy life and to experience pleasures, and that man is the best arbiter of what is good for him, i.e. man is the decider of his own purpose and destiny. We need to challenge this underlying concept, because it would imply that God is an interfering interloper, and that we have no need of. Therefore, his judgment and punishment of us would be unjust, since man would in effect be a separate God who exists as equals with God. A'udhu billah. And because it believes that man is deserving of pleasure, it abhors the concept of hell. This is why you'll probably never see many public debates discussing whether paradise is just. Infinite pleasures for what, finite deeds? Is that just? But God is not an interloper who exists on equal terms with us. He is an infinite creator and maintainer of everything that exists, including us. Reality as we observe it, the universe and even the animal world, are certainly not acting according to liberalism. Maybe they didn't get the memo. But liberalism is philosophically contradictory, irrational, and unwarranted by evidence of creation itself. So the purpose of the creation of man and free will is responsibility and duty, not autonomy and hedonism. God has a right to define our purpose, just like he defined our existence. If something creates other things for no reason, then this creator has no will and is just random. But if a creator possesses intentionality, i.e. will, then that which he creates possesses purpose. And this purpose constitutes the establishment of the relationship between us and the creator. We therefore are God's own creation and his property, of which he exercises the right of disposal, i.e. the right to do so with as he pleases. God has defined that he should be worshipped by us. This takes the form of recognizing him as the infinite and unlimited being that initiated the heavens and the earth. He is thus the sole reference point for all our belief and action. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, do you think that we created you in jest without any purpose and that you would not be brought back to us? So, is it fair now to hold human beings to account? For human beings to be fairly held accountable, there must be 4 conditions fulfilled generally. The humans held accountable must be aware, to some extent, of the gravity of the actions that they are going to be undertaking. 2, the humans held accountable must be the origin of their choices, not something else. And 3, the humans agreed to undertake the trial of fulfilling their purpose by consent, although this is not absolutely necessary. And 4, mitigating circumstances should be taken into consideration. So God is not a robot which is going to just punish you or judge you according to a fixed criteria. He'll take your individual circumstances into consideration. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Allah does not charge a soul beyond its capacity. So first, humans held accountable must be aware to some extent of the gravity of the actions they take. No one will be punished without them being reminded, forewarned, and given chances to accept the truth. The people being sent to hell will be asked, according to the Quran, that did not messengers come to you from amongst yourselves, reciting to you the signs of your Lord, and warning you against the encounter of this day? They shall say, yes indeed. And then it goes on to say, how evil is the lodging of those who are proud. So they rejected this. So basically, if you haven't received the message, then it's not your fault, right? You have to wait for the message to come to you, or you to encounter this message by some way, shape, or form. So that's fair. The humans held accountable must be the origin of their choices. And now this goes with determinism now. Let's have some fun with this. In order for humans to be accountable, the actions they make must have free will to make choices. Free will is disputed by materialist neuroscientists who portray humans as robots acting automatically. However, experimental results do not actually show that. We'll get into that a bit later. But saying there's a consensus of materialist neuroscientists and saying that this, look, they believe in, materialism, it's a fact now. It's pretty much like me going to the Vatican and saying that there's a consensus of priests that Catholicism is true, and hence that must mean it's a fact which I have to accept. These people are just subject to bias. For example, the steady state theory, where the universe was deemed to be eternal and ever changing, and the famous atheist scientist Fred Hoyle rejected George Lemaitre, who was a Catholic priest, ironically, the Big Bang theory, and he called it the Big Bang theory, because he thought that by accepting the Big Bang theory, you'd introduce the need for a creator. And so he actually opposed it, and for a great long while he tried to prove the steady state theory until evidence just overwhelmed them, and then they all accepted it. But the majority of scientists at the time believed that the steady state theory was correct. Now, the experiments which he's referring to, and there's a whole bunch of them, they do show that the subconscious is responsible for initiating impulses to act in humans. But this does not deny accountability of free will. The Quran talks about agreeing to an impulse suggested by your nafs. These new claims that the subconscious has a powerful effect on our behavior is old hat to Islam. We don't call it subconscious, we call it nafs. And of course, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and so the nafs of Qabil, referring to Qabil, encouraged him and made it fair seeming to him the murder of his brother, and he murdered him and became one of the losers. So you had Qabil, who was basically being incited to action by his nafs, but surely the nafs is also part of your brain, right? So it's not two people, but it's showing there's the will of us, the soul or the will of us, and then there's the nafs, and the nafs initiates. Look how the nafs initiated the proposition for Qabil to murder his brother. Qabil did not come up with that idea initially. It was, i.e., his desires initiated it. And again, preeminent neuroscientist Benjamin Libet, who started the entire enterprise of experiments on free will in the first place, demonstrated by experiment that the human conscious possesses a minimum of 150 milliseconds to veto any impulse originating from the subconscious. So your subconscious basically initiates a desire, and your conscious can veto it, can stop it, and choose a different action. You see, so this veto gives us a moral responsibility. You can't say, I felt like doing it, so I did it. No, you could have stopped yourself from doing it. And Benjamin Libet, the person who came up with the whole bunch of experiments in the first place to look at materialism or determinism and free will, himself is saying this, and it's demonstrated by his experiments. And I'm going to quote a few more, but time's limited. The Prophet Muhammad said that Allah has forgiven my ummah that which is whispered to them and which crosses their minds, so long as they do not act upon it or speak it. So what is that? That's veto, right? You're only punished if you don't veto your desires and you follow your desires. And again, the ayahs of the Quran are numerous on this, and hadiths. I just selected two. So it's like, to give you an example of how the mind works, it's like being in a company. The workers, your subordinates, produce the proposal. The analysts make the calculations, but in the end, it is the director which decides which proposal to pick. That is, in essence, what these neuroscientists have been saying, who are not biased by a certain materialistic bent. Now, humans, the third point, humans agreed to undertake the moral trust of fulfilling their purpose. Before creation, before we were put into creation, we were asked by God, do we want to accept this moral responsibility? The heavens and the earth, all inanimate objects which were given the capacity to understand, shirked away from it. But human beings accepted. So if we accepted it, then we can't blame other people, other things for our predicament. We did accept this upon us, and Surah 33:72 says this. There also is mitigating circumstances that should be taken into consideration for human beings to be fairly held accountable. If humans are prone to following their environment and circumstances, then is the afterlife fair? Well, the human propensity to be swayed by environment and conditioning is mitigated by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which He weights our good deeds by multiples of 10, and our bad deeds only weighted 1. And also, and again, Surah 6, Ayah 160 gives you that. God will show 99 times more mercy to us on the Day of Judgment than all the mercy that has ever existed in the entire universe. And, of course, He will forgive whole swathes of our sins just based on a few good deeds that we've done, or even a few moderate deeds that we did consistently. And I'll quote the ayah on this. Those who believe and work righteous deeds, from them shall we blot out all evil that may be in them, and we shall reward them according to the best of their deeds. And furthermore, if that wasn't enough, in Allah's mercy, He has sent down to us a revealed law system to create an environment that limit public temptation to commit evil and establish socially reinforced values and ethics to aid psychological maturity. This is why Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who brought the revealed guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is called a mercy to mankind. So in order to help us from these temptations which might affect us, and from our environment, we're going to change our environment to prevent these temptations in public. So in conclusion, it is just that humans should be held accountable for their intentional actions. Now the final part, the justice of the recompense of hell. Let us first ask the question, what do we mean by justice? Justice is giving to someone what they deserve based upon what they are or what they have done, i.e. their intrinsic value or the value of the actions they have done. For example, in the human world, a person that works hard in the job deserves payment. And a baby is a vulnerable human being that intrinsically deserves care and sustenance. So justice must involve giving to them what is deserved. Now, why is there pleasure and pain in the afterlife? Well, it's for the same reason there's pleasure and pain in this life. Pleasure and pain is experienced by living created beings as motivations and consequences. We need feelings to move us, and we need feelings to reward us for fulfilling our purpose. For example, like contentment after sexual reproduction, or to warn us, i.e. stop us putting our hand into the fire, or as suffering to remind us and absolve us. The necessity of their existence emanates from our created purpose. So pain and pleasure emanates from our created purpose. Thus, in the afterlife, we will be accounted for our adherence to our purpose using the only thing we can experience. These two sensations, pain and pleasure. This leads us to the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the creation called hell. It is a recompense for bad actions and is a residence for those who intrinsically deserve it. Let us first look at hell as a recompense for bad actions. Hell will be used to settle the balance of bad deeds for unrepentant and thus unforgiven sinners who will then be granted paradise. And there is a hadith, a very beautiful hadith, where there will be intercession of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who will find anyone in hell that even has an atom's weight of belief, or an atom's weight of belief, and they will be taken out of hell. So this is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you did bad deeds and you're in hell, you will be taken out of it at some point. But people do not have a problem with this view of hell. However, they claim hell produces an infinite punishment for finite actions. But hell is everlasting, not infinite in existence, nor does it punish to an infinite degree of pain, even at the lowest levels of hell. What I mean by this is everlasting is not infinite. Our souls are everlasting, but we're not infinite. No one's going to say our soul is infinite. So hell is not infinite, and nor is the degree of pain you experience infinite. It's finite. It's always going to be finite, but it's going to be everlasting. This is something different now. I want to also give a difference between action and sin. Sin is the value of intentions behind the action, not the action itself. So, for example, a doctor using a knife to cut you open for an operation is not a bad thing, but a rioter on the street that stabs you, for example, is a bad thing. So sin can cause a greater evil than merely the time it took or the effort it took to commit it. So for example, I could inject someone with a very strong poison and kill them in 10 seconds. But clearly my act would not deserve only 10 seconds of punishment or a gentle squeeze with a thumb. Because the significance of my action is much greater than that action. And we accept this just intuitively and rationally, so this is not a problem. So the moral value must depend on the magnitude of the significance of the intentional action. Rejecting the rights of someone has a negative value equal to the degree the right was offended against and the gravity of that right. If I attempt to lock someone up in prison, I have impinged upon his right, or rather I've committed offence against his right. But if I kill that person, that's a greater offence against their right to life. As I have shown, God has the right to be worshipped alone because he is the infinite and unlimited creator. To intend to associate partners to God, which comes in many forms, is to attempt to claim a limitation against his power and being, as the existence of equals to him would constitute a limit to his power and existence. So tell me, what do you think is the gravity of denying God as the infinite being and derogating him to finitude? What is the magnitude between the finite and the infinite? The gravity of that action in the eyes of God is severe in the extreme. In fact, this crime is so severe that it merits from God an inexhaustible punishment against an unrepentant criminal. Anything less than perpetual punishment is an injustice to God's right. Some people ask, how can God punish unrepentant associators and rejectors forever? I ask, why should he not? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Allah forgives not that partner should be set up with him. Less than that, he forgives to whomever he will. Whosoever associates with Allah anything has indeed forged a mighty sin. Ithm azim, the word azim, mighty sin, which is interesting because one of Allah's names is Al-Azim, the mighty. So this is how severe this sin is. First, the Quran confirms the gravity of the sin of shirk. This brings us to discuss the type of people hell is designed for. Hell is also a residence for people who intrinsically deserve it, I will argue. Purpose is the measure of our intrinsic worth. If we become intrinsically against our purpose by becoming a rejecter of God, such that it becomes the very nature of us, then we can be called intrinsically evil. Such a person will now deserve to have their rights to fulfillment permanently rejected by means of frustration in the afterlife, or what we call pain. The rejection of God by these people is perpetual and without end, so why shouldn't their recompense also be? If you could but see what they made to stand before, when they're made to stand before the fire, they will say, "Oh, would that we could be returned to life on earth and not deny the signs of our Lord and be among the believers." But what they concealed before has now appealed to them, and even if they were returned, they would return to what they were forbidden. Indeed, they are liars. Now, this is what Allah is saying in the Quran. That in hell they say, yes, please, if you take us out, we would worship you and we would be, devotional followers of you. But they're saying this because they're being punished. They're not repentant of it. They're saying this. And the true nature of their soul has become manifest. Life has now manifested. Their true colors have come out. And so if they had been returned to this world, they would again go on rejecting God, denying him to his face, so to speak. And so they are indeed liars. You may ask, why doesn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just destroy them? But this would allow them to escape their sentence. It would be unjust of God to let a rejecter leave hell when they have not reformed themselves, or they cannot reform themselves. How many kuffar, what we call rejectors of truth or God, would gladly spend a limited duration of millions of years in hell just for the chance to do what they wanted in this life and defy God for the sake of their egos. This would be the afterlife equivalent of letting out of prison an unreformed murderer and rapist. Therefore, the punishment of hell is just. In summary, I believe that I have demonstrated rationally, with support from Islamic textual sources, the right of God to hold human beings to account is just. The holding of human beings to account is just, and the recompense of hell is just. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, "And fear the day when ye shall be brought back to God. Then shall every soul be paid for what it earned, and none shall be dealt with unjustly." Thank you.
Thank you, Abdullah. We now have 2 7-minute rebuttal sessions, and I'd like to invite our first speaker, Farhan, to a 7-minute rebuttal.
Thank you, Abdullah, for your opening statement. Abdullah started off his opening. Abdullah started off his opening statement by saying that the argument that I'm presenting is purely, quote, emotional, and I disagree with you. I thought that I started my opening statement very clearly on empirical facts and used philosophical deductive reasoning based on those facts, right? I said that there are elements of indoctrination. I said that there's elements of brainwashing, there's elements of human conditioning, predetermined circumstances that we can all agree on. You have no choice but what time period you were born in, whether you may be male or female, who your parents would be, what they would teach you, etc. All of these are basic empirical facts that we can all agree on, and then using deductive reasoning, I said that it would be unjust, based on this, to punish, let alone torture, these individuals who are determined to do what they do. And so this is not purely an emotional, rather it's backed by a rational and empirical, with rational and empirical evidence. But being a mystic and being somebody who is spiritual, I don't discount the significance of an experience. And of course, emotion is tied into our experience. And in fact, Hamid al-Ghazali, in his book Deliverance from Error, alayhi salam, he talked about the importance of experiences versus the mental gymnastics of philosophy, and that the experience of suffering, the experience of evil, the experience of hell, torture, is relevant to us. How can we possibly insult reality by reducing it, to mental gymnastics and mechanisms? And as a mystic, I would argue that, and I think Sheikh Hamid al-Ghazali would also. But as far as it being a purely emotional argument, it's not. It's not an appeal to emotion. Now, he says that, he quotes, that, did not messengers come to you? And he claimed that this was pride that was keeping them from embracing this message. Well, where did that pride come from? Where did narcissism come from? When we look at the study of human behavior, when we look at the development of personality, especially we look at two specific periods, three specific, probably multiple periods within human life and development. Infancy, childhood, and adolescence are periods of time where our bodies and our brains, the very physiology of them, are not developed. We have no idea what's going on in the world. And yet we are being conditioned by experiences and we are developing within our personality traits such as pride. Pride is something that is constantly being developed. Narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder, for example, this is something that is developed throughout a time when a child and adolescent is not even developed. And so when the adult becomes who they are, they're molded into multiple traits that they're exhibiting. So experiences within the childhood of an individual could lead the latter adult to behave arrogantly towards the material that he's handling. Now, Abdullah says that these are relative circumstances, and I agree. But what I'm saying is that every single individual person is a relative circumstance. And no person in their right minds would reject the truth knowingly that they're going to be punished for eternity. Who in their right minds would reject the truth knowingly? If I have a perception of reality, and that perception of reality entails Christianity, and entails atheism, whatever worldview that I personally have, whatever biases, again, we're talking about psychologies, each and every one of us have biases. Each and every one of us has been through conditioning. Each and every one of us is digging ourselves deeper and deeper into our worldview through confirmation bias. And through this process of human development comes pride. And comes the fueling of this pride, which of course is not just, as Brother Abdullah talked about, on a subconscious and unconscious level, you can call it the nafs. And Hamid al-Ghazali talks about this being at the level of nafs al-amara and nafs al-lawama, that at that stage that often free choice becomes obsolete. This is Hamid al-Ghazali talking about free will. That in those two stages where we have these subconscious and nafsi experiences that our actions, our choices become obsolete. In the Quran it says that we have sealed their hearts. They are deaf, dumb, and blind. They will not see. Why won't they see? What circumstances led them to that condition of not being able to see? And is it their fault? So again, we have relativism here. So Adolf Hitler and Abu Jahl, they went through all of this conditioning, developed their personality, became who they are, had their biases, were taught their religions, were taught by their environment and their nurturing everything that they knew. And so they had this perception of reality. They were brainwashed, indoctrinated, conditioned to do and believe everything that they believed and did. And this is, I agree, it's relative. Each and every person is relative in that sense. But again, who in their right minds would reject the truth knowingly? I stand before you an agnostic, someone who claims to not know. I was a Muslim apologist. I defended Islam on an academic stage. I defended the honor and the personality of the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran and all of this. And I'm arguing before you that hell is unjust. knowing that I'm going to go to hell for eternity? Does that make any sense? So where did this pride come from? What about child and adolescence when our bodies and our minds are not developed? Now, as far he also mentioned, oh my gosh, is my time up?
In 10 seconds.
Okay. Well, in terms of science, think of it as taqleed, right? Because the biologists, chemists, physicists, psychologists, they know what we're talking about. Just like the scholars of Islam know what they're talking about. So as lay people, it's imperative, because we haven't done the research, we haven't done the experiments, we're not biologists, we're not chemists, we're not physicists, we're not psychologists. So it's imperative for us to look at the consensus of these individuals when we're dealing with what they're talking about here. Because he compared that to going to the consensus of Catholic priests. But I guess my time is up.
Indeed. Thank you very much. In a second, I'm going to invite Abdullah to give his 7-minute rebuttal. I just want to propose a slight change to the format. We did start late, 15 minutes late. Abdullah has suggested, and it's up to Farhan to accept this, that we shave off a bit of time from originally the 30 minutes open panel discussion to say 20 minutes. And then the Q&A to 25 minutes instead of 30. We will get chucked out of this place on time. It's not as if I'm being particularly fascist about this. They'll come in and chuck us out. So we either do it the nice way, or they come in and chuck us out in the middle of your Q&A. So, you agree with that?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Unless there's any strong objections to the floor. No. Good. In that case, Abdullah, you have your. Sorry. Babies. What about them? Great things, I know. Okay. Right. It's 7 minutes.
Okay, I'll do it. I'll discuss it in reverse order. I'm not denying that, or going against the consensus of neuroscientists. I'm saying that there is no consensus of neuroscientists. There's a consensus of materialist neuroscientists amongst materialist neuroscientists. But even then, there's no consensus. Like, for example, Daniel Dennett believes that you can be fully materialist, fully in matter, but still have free will through some mechanism which he goes into detail about. So there's not even a consensus amongst neuroscientists about this issue, about some materialist neuroscientists. But I want to just quote a few quotes because we're just a layman, right? So let's discuss this. Dr. Adina L. Roskies, PhD in neuroscience and cognitive science at Dartmouth College, New Hampshire, said that although some researchers contend that neuroscience will undermine our views about free will, to date no results have succeeded in fundamentally disrupting our common sense beliefs. Again, Benjamin Liebe says in many references, but I'll just quote one, that the existence of a potentiality to veto is not in doubt, so i.e. your conscious vetoing any action that your subconscious, any impulse of your subconscious. That the conscious decision to veto could be made without direct specifications for that decision by the preceding unconscious processes. Such a view of the veto allows genuine conscious free will to be a controlling agent in the performance of a voluntary act, even though conscious free will appears not to initiate the volitional process. So he's saying that even though your consciousness might not initiate your impulses, you certainly have a choice as to whether you act on those impulses. And again, Benjamin Liebe is the guy who started experiments on the neuroscience of free will. So he's not just any old person or a person on the sidelines. He started the entire experimentation, the empirical examination of this subject. But I would, the best article I'd recommend is this one by W.R. Clem, College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences in Texas, which is entitled Free Will Debates, Simple Experiments Are Not So Simple. And he says, the notion that free will is an illusion has achieved such a wide acceptance amongst philosophers and neuroscientists that it seems to be acquiring the status of a dogma. Nonetheless, research continues. So, and then he gives a number of arguments poking holes at the interpretations, not the experimental data. In fact, the experimental data, whereby you can see this act of veto, where basically your conscious mind vetoes your impulse and says, no, I won't do this. He said that this study could actually support a free will interpretation, I quote unquote. And he also notices that in the magnetic resonance scanner imaging system they did of a mind when it was undergoing one of the experiments, which I won't bore you with the details. But they noticed that there was a higher impulse for action after the individual registered they were conscious of making a decision. A much higher impulse, by a magnitude of 2, twice as big of electrical activity. Secondly, in one experiment where they could predict people's decisions based on whether you're going to choose a left or right on some buttons you have to press on, like 2 remote controls kind of devices. And they predicted, we can predict with 95% certainty that what people would choose. Interesting. How do you count for the 5%? Why is this 5%? And secondly, what is that when you're asking someone to basically to press a button when you feel like it? You can't make a choice out of that. It's basically when you feel like it, and that comes from your subconscious. It has to. Your subconscious processes everything from when you drive a car to to when you're walking and when you're going through traffic or you're walking through a crowd or doing sports or any activity. Your subconscious is doing all the calculations and making all the decisions. But we go on autopilot, you see, because it takes care of us, and it's much faster processor than our intellect. Where they made the jump from that being now we are robotic automatons that just do automate, I don't understand. But actually I do. Materialistic neuroscientists who are unbiased. Anyway, he said that basically it's not an emotional argument. Now, I was reading out for my presentation, so obviously I didn't know what you were going to say.
Okay.
But I would hazard a guess that, and I actually put down for my summary, which I have here. Well, I'm going to say in my summary that you Farhan, have a natural empathy towards, I think, human beings, which is a very laudable kind of virtue to have. And you feel concerned for your parents, don't we all? And some truths. Firstly, I don't think you should have judged your parents. Who knows where they would have gone, right? You shouldn't have judged your parents. Well, are they going to go to hell or not? Allah judges. You should have confidence that Allah, who is just, will treat your parents justly. But what I would say, I think it is an emotional argument. Oh, torture is bad. It's just some American institute said that it's bad, and it's like, yeah, but we live in a pleasure and pain existence. So. Fine, if you want to say God is bad, that's fine, but He still exists, and that still is the paradigm that you have to accept. If there's no escape. This universe is painful and it has suffering, and you're going to debate that tomorrow with my friend Sami Zati. So I guess the way to sum it up is it's like playing a card game. You don't choose what cards you get, but you choose how you play those cards. And this is precisely the case. And as for, wherever you seem to be born, people adopt the religion of where they're born and these kind of things. Well, I disagree with you because I had the exact same experience. And I used to I've given, I think, a TV show about how I converted to Islam. And I said basically that I asked myself the question, does geography determine truth? No, it doesn't. And I woke up to that, I investigated, and alhamdulillah, Allah showed me the truth. And I followed it. So I am an evidence against that. You always have a choice. The fact that most human beings won't wake up from following the very vanities of their society is just a problem of human beings, but not Allah being unjust. And I think most of the case, I want to answer this denialism aspect. In psychology, you cannot be a psychologist and disbelieve in the concept of human denial, just to deny things. Truths which are unpalatable. Things which, just think for yourself. If someone came and told you that everything you believed was wrong and your parents were wrong and it's all completely rubbish and it's just atheism or whatever, it's a very big shock. You wouldn't like it, right? You'd try your best, some of us, to maybe even insincerely deny it and find excuses, right? There you go. You see? And you were faced with, apparently, you said you were faced with that, but you overcame it, right? Yet you deny other people's ability I suppose in your belief you actually recognize the truth and then you followed it. But I would say that most people don't want to follow that truth and they lie to themselves. Mm-hmm. And any psychologist knows how human beings can lie to themselves. Anyway, that's my time up. Thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you, Abdullah. We're now going to have that 20-minute open panel discussion we agreed upon 7 minutes ago. So I will now move my chair backwards and let our two guest speakers talk to each other on their own terms, in their own way, for the next 20 minutes. Okay, I'll just for your records.
So this is just a discussion, right? Between
It's just a conversation. We can talk about the weather, family, and so we just got a few eavesdroppers. That's all.
Okay.
I mean, as I said, I think we should maybe try and use it to try to discuss things that I didn't cover, and maybe I thought we didn't cover.
Yeah.
Basically, what I'm trying to say is, God is not human. And for human beings, it's very bad to torture each other. It's disgusting. And if I remember when I saw, Gaddafi being captured by those rebels, and that guy, he killed people, got people raped, horrific tortures in prison, in some dark holes where they never came out of, some disgusting, horrific kind of oppression on his people. And I knew this, but when I saw him being beaten up by those rebels, I felt sorry for him. Even though every rational sense in my body knows that he's actually getting less than what he deserves in this life anyway. He's getting less than what he deserves. But something about my heart as being a human being, I felt sorry for him. And likewise, the people in heaven will see the people in hell and feel sorry for them too. This is human. We're human. But God is not human. He's merciful and he's just, but he's not human. And for a human being to do to another human being, I agree, because it's not in our nature to do so. It's against our nature. And what's against our nature is evil. If you go against your nature. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have a predetermined nature that he must follow. And so Allah does what he pleases with his creation. And that's what I'm positing is just. But, what's your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I still think that, is the question that would come to my mind is human morality superior to whatever you would posit is divine morality? Is our definition of cruel and unusual punishment morally superior to Allah's understanding of what wouldn't be apparently cruel and unusual punishment? You see what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, of course. But as I said, every creation has laws that govern that creation. So for us, the laws that govern us is that we can't inflict pain. I wouldn't say the punishment that God puts upon those who reject him is cruel and unusual, because unusual means that it's out of the ordinary, whereas obviously the hell it would be ordinary for a lot of them. But cruel means that they're getting more punishment than they deserve. But I'm saying that if you look at the actual, you could say the theological the import and significance of what they've done to their creator, I think it's justified, very justified. In fact, I don't like. If I think about it, if I imagine it, I find it very, very bad. I wouldn't want to be in that situation, obviously. But that's the point.
Well, I mean, I think cruel and unusual punishment. I'm using that term because that's on all of the political documents that these governments have formed. Cruelty is not defined as giving something to the person that would be the definition of justice more so. Cruel and unusual punishment or cruel punishment, and they give examples of it, but rather than using those examples would be having a person burned to the core and then replacing the skin to start it all over again endlessly. That would be cruel and it would be unusual.
But why would it be cruel? What criteria are you using to establish cruelty?
Cruelty would be, it's a basic definition. The definition of cruel is not, and I don't have a dictionary to get the precise definition. I maybe should have.
Anyone with iPhones, please take it out.
But But the idea is that cruel would mean that it's sadistic. Sadistic is also a psychology term. Sadism, where a person inflicts, torturous, gratuitous pain on another person
for pleasure.
For pleasure.
Yeah.
In this sense, we wouldn't say that it's for pleasure. Maybe it's for purposes of justice. But it could still be, I think, defined as cruel if we have a precise definition.
Sure,
would you say that it's not cruel?
God's justice is not cruel, no. And I'll say it like this. Remember what I said at the beginning, right? God's justice is not cruel. Because we are coming with, like you said, yeah, we are biased by our conditions, our environment, and so on. In most cases, this is the case. And one of this is liberalism, which says that, oh, the purpose of man is to enjoy ourselves and be happy and whatever, and do what you want. And so God is kind of like an interloper, and if like he's just interfering with us in this kind of worldview. And in that sense, if someone interferes with you and punishes you, you'd view them, oh, they're sadistic. How dare they interfere? What they got to do with me? Well, he's only the creator and maintainer of your very existence. But hey, So that's why I'm saying that by your criteria, if you're using the liberal criteria, then fine. But I would argue liberalism is irrational anyway. If you're going to use from within the framework of Islam, it's consistent and not cruel and unusual. It's deserved. It's certainly a very painful, punishment. Certainly, very painful. But it's not cruel. But you are the keyboard dictionary.
I don't mean to bring levity into a very serious subject, but this is the definition.
Oh dear.
One of the definitions in law that, according to my friend here, the infliction of physical or mental distress, especially when considered a determinant in granting a divorce. That's what it says. That's what it says. The first definition is really unhelpful. The quality. This is the definition of cruelty. The quality or condition of being cruel. Okay. Very helpful.
Then you have to find what cruel means now.
Yeah, sort of never-ending. The second one, which is probably more pertinent, although perhaps not very helpful, something such as a cruel act or remark that causes pain or suffering. So it's not really defining cruel. It's just,
cruel act that causes. Okay.
But the one to do with divorce, I think, perhaps might be most pertinent.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, just to respond to that really quickly, I thought that you were very clever in saying that the God's justice is not cruel. Well, rather, more so I'm perhaps you can call it however you want to call it. Would you say that burning somebody to the core and then replacing their skin so they can be burned again in an endless and everlasting and in a pointless way, really, at some point within the everlasting, it becomes pointless. Would you say that that's not cruel? I mean, rather than terming it that way, that God's justice is not cruel.
Okay, I would say, again, there's a kind of endful meme in this, which is a hidden subtext, which is basically that this individual who we are considering is an innocent person. And would it be cruel to burn this innocent person? Well, no. Who are we talking about? Yeah, we're talking about people who are rejectors of God, who've defied him to his face, so to speak, and follow their own egos in derogation to the infinite, unlimited, and absolute being that created everything. When you put it in that perspective, it's not cruel, it's just. But for me to go out and punish someone by burning them, even a criminal would be bad, because just merely stealing or whatever, or committing murder amongst human beings is not necessarily something that deserves being burnt at the stake or what have you. So as I said, it depends who are you talking about.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I could fathom punishment. I could even fathom annihilation, but torture is what gets me. The idea of torture and the ethics of torture and endless torture and the types of torture that's described in the Quran is very disturbing. And I mean, it still boggles my mind that anybody can be morally serious. And trust me, I think that you are serious, but for other reasons. But I just don't see how you can possibly defend that torture is justice. Punishment for a person who's rejected, yes. Annihilation, yes. But torture, I mean, I don't see how you wouldn't define that as cruelty.
But it's not punishment. Again, it's use of words. If you want to call it in a derogatory sense, you say, "Oh, it's torture." But usually, torture has been done to a person to get them to do something or to extract. They are tortured. However, punishment is something else. There's a finality of punishment. Punishment is the end of the punishment is in itself what it's meant to be, what it's doing. It's not doing it for a higher reason. So in that sense, it's not torture. It would be punishment. But again, this would be semantics. But what I will say is the reason why I suspect there was an emotional reason behind this is because no one's ever given me any rational argument why it's cruel or unjust. The only one argument I've heard is an attempted argument is infinite punishment and finite sins, but it's not really infinite punishment. It's perpetual, but it's not infinite. So just like heaven is not infinite reward or treasure, but it's a perpetual, but it's not infinite. So I have never seen any rational argument from a theological basis. Obviously, there's neuroscience discussion and something else.
Because now I guess we're getting into determinism a little bit. You said that there's no consensus. Again, Daniel Dennett, for example, says that there's some in his book, Freedom Evolves. He says that there's evitability. And that's his basic argument. That because we're avoiders, we're avoiding agents that we can avoid certain things. So therefore, there's compatibilism. He's still a determinist. He's a soft determinist, but he's still a determinist. But I think that there is an overwhelming consensus among scientists and philosophers that determinism is real, and that causality is real. You can't have an event that's uncaused. There has to be some form of causality there, and so it is a consensus. But I also would say because and I never got to address the Lebet experiment and the idea of vetoing. Of course, there are experiments done after that. That was the first attempt, the fMRI experiment that came after that. And what the fMRI experiment showed was that the person who's observing your brain, the neurological processes and the brain activity in your brain, can know what you're going to choose 6 seconds before you're consciously aware of it. And this is the basic argument from neuroscience. Every neuroscientist I've ever read says that this is empirical evidence for determinism. But the idea to veto is the argument that you brought up. And again, and you said that the subconscious. You also talked about how the subconscious is based on the decisions that we're making. But again, what is the subconscious doing? Where is it getting its information from? That's what we need to focus on. And why is the subconscious deciding to veto what we normally would do? And that's what I discussed in my opening statement, is that the very notion that we are vetoing what we would normally do also has subconscious factors. Why are we choosing to veto? Okay. There has to be some causal factors there.
Okay, well, basically it's very simple. Benjamin Libet's veto interpretation has not been refuted by any of the latest experimental data. I mean, I've got papers which say it was justified, and this is in late 2010, which is just about a year and so on ago. Mm-hmm. So, and this is why the W.R. Clem, who actually looked at the methodological flaws and the flaws in interpreting it in that MRI experiment in the deterministic way, and it's actually quite detailed. I printed that copy for you, by the way. So
awesome!
You get to really get goodies to go away with. All right, but basically it's very simple. This your subconscious calculates. If you ask it to do a task which does not require, just do a basic task regarding, the spatial world or various kind of things, it will calculate. If I could have an eye into that, I could predict what you would do. In most cases, that is just automatic, because the subconscious aspect is the calculator in your brain, so to speak. It will calculate how you hit a ball, how you kick it, or whatever. When you're playing football, or your kind of conditioning, your prior conditionings that has conditioned your subconscious will make you predict about like what strategy you'll use in a debate. What ideas you'll be more interested about, what kind of art or cinema you like, or music you like. So in most cases, humans are predictable because the subconscious is part of causality. I didn't deny that at all. Subconscious is influenced by your environment, it's influenced by your conditions, by your teachers, your parents, random events that happen to you throughout your life. I completely agree. But I'm saying that the subconscious is not the only aspect of the human being. There is now another aspect which neuroscientists all agree on, which is the mind, which they can't seem to pin down in any experiment, and which you also believe as some kind of like some mystic aspect. You say that this is mind, or they some posit like Libet believes it's some kind of electromagnetic field of some kind, and they basically all posit that this mind can veto impulses and pick lesser impulses. So, for example, you need to have options. So, for example, let's say I used to be an alcoholic and I was walking past, an alcoholic license store or whatever, and I saw alcohol, and I have a strong urge to go in and buy some alcohol. But let's say I was a religious person, and I say no, I'm not going to do that. but the religious impulse in me, maybe I didn't have much of what we call taqwa, or a kind of, I wasn't on a spiritual high, and so the impulse to drink alcohol was stronger. But I could, and I have in my life chosen lesser impulses than the stronger impulse. So you need to have options. You can't, if your nafs only gives you one option, then you'll do it with no choice, without no choice. But your nafs, or your subconscious, gives you multiple options. One from your spiritual instinct, your desire to worship God, which will always kick in at the same time as your desire to, disrespect God or not worship Him. So again, none of these experiments have refuted anything to do with the Islamic conception of free will. In fact, I say it reaffirms it. I might bring up my Quran and science lecture coming up maybe. So, so this is again. I've got Dr. Dina Elrosky's Massimo Piglucci, and Benjamin Leibe, Clem, Stephen G. Morris, Joe Anderson. I could just print them off all day, but we can't discuss. I'll give you copies if you want.
Okay, sure.
You'll get to read it. But this is why I don't see any evidence except the bias of materialistic neuroscience to just say there is no soul and there's only matter and we are kind of like robots. So.
Well, as far as first of all, in terms of neuroscience, to say that there's no consensus is almost like saying that there's no consensus amongst biologists that evolution is a fact. There's some Christians and maybe some Muslim biologists that will disagree, but it is a consensus amongst biologists, by and large, that evolution is a fact. Just as an example, yeah, there are some who say that it's not, but they have their theological biases. It's the same thing with neuroscience. There's a vast majority consensus that of reductionism, that what you call the mind is a product of brain chemistry and mental states. What you brought up was because you said that I'm a mystic. You brought up Cartesian dualism, which is something that René Descartes talked about. That the mind and the physical body, and in this case the brain, are separate. Neuroscience does not support that at all. There's no, in fact, that's philosophical conjecture. My mysticism is based off my agnosticism, but that's a different conversation altogether. Agnosticism is the premise of not knowing and therefore being open to the possibilities. But I don't think that I can empirically verify Cartesian dualism, nor does neuroscience support it at all. It says that the mind is in fact simply a product of chemical processes or mental states.
2 minutes.
Sorry.
I'd apologise.
Okay, now coming back to the veto idea, again, you said, for example, the example that you gave was you going to want alcohol or not to want alcohol. In that situation, of course, you have a religious upbringing, so there are causal factors there. Subconscious factors that are making you want to decide to do otherwise. That's the definition that Peter Van Inwagen gave again, to the ability or power to sometimes do otherwise as you normally would. And so this entire concept of vetoing that you brought up from LeBay, it's again fueled by the subconscious experiences and conditioning and brainwashing and indoctrination and so on that we each go through from infancy and beyond, perhaps even before infancy in the womb.
Sure, but you know what? When you say that, maybe your desire to not drink alcohol was conditioned by some event in the past, but that's what I was saying. I was saying that the nafs gives you options based on a number of conditions, and you pick one. That's my point. The point of picking it, they can't say it. But instead, materialist neuroscientists have invoked the deus ex machina of, the genes make you do it. And okay, we don't have any proof to say exactly what, that a gene will make you choose X, Y, and Z, but we believe it, so that settles it. And gene has replaced soul. The gene is immortal, it always replicates, it continues beyond your death, all this stuff. The gene, for the materialist, has replaced the concept of soul. And it is pure dogma that they say that in any one of these arbitrary situations, you choose one or the other. And a person might choose a lesser impulse one day and a stronger impulse the next day, in exactly the same situation. How do you account for this? And they'll say, maybe it was a gene at that point, and whatever. But again, this is now speculation. There is, and I'm agreeing with you that yes, everything in your nafs is some kind of preconditioning at some point in your encounters with experience of the world, experience of the truth, and you made choices. And I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying there's something more to that. And I mean, again, just to finish off, on this paper, it was written by W.R. Clem. He says, regarding the experiment, the MRI experiment you're referring to, he said, like, to me, an obvious interpretation is that the frontal and cingulate cortex could have been processing the rules of the game and the free will intent to move. So it's basically saying that your nufs processes, when you say, I'm going to press a button when I feel like it, your nufs will then make calculations and say, do it now. Or I'll do it after 3 seconds, or whatever, you know? So your nufs does it. That doesn't require free will, it just requires calculation. And your nufs does that all the time. It's how you can survive, how you can react without thinking. Because in many situations, if you took the time to think, the car's coming to you, you think, which way should I move? You know, left, right, should I jump over it like Chuck Norris? No. No, the nufs goes, you know, forget that, just jump. And it will jump in right or left, whatever, according to how it calculates.
My nafs are propelling me to say time is up.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you both gentlemen for that fascinating discussion. I'm going to take a 15-second liberty and just say that why does an English white middle-class Christian type like myself encounter Islam through interested inquiry and then converts to Islam? How am I predetermined to do that? What is it in my white middle-class Christian background that predisposes me to Islam? There isn't anything. I think there are other factors involved. So that's my controversial.
Oh, I'd be glad to process that with you.
We'll process away later. We're now having a 25-minute Q&A. Right, who is hands, please? So Father Frank, Lee, Father Frank.
I am with Abdullah against Farhan on the question of free will. It seems to me the case, the determinist case, is at least not proven. Indeed, I would say the very nature of this discussion tonight indicates that we don't really believe in determinism. If determinism was the case, each speaker would be determined to hold the views he holds, and there would be no question of debating about them. You would just be conditioned, determined, so there would be no question of truth or falsehood. But I agree with, I think that Abdullah has not really fully met the moral point which Farhan makes concerning the cruel punishments. It's not sentimental. Torture, objecting to torture, is not sentimental. We do not object to Guantanamo for sentimental reasons. We object to torture in Guantanamo because there are treaties which should have been observed. It is unjust to treat treaties against torture, which the United States has signed on to. And also, there is a surreal debate here about the definition of cruelty, because anyone who wants to ask, who questions whether in fact forcing someone to drink boiling water forever and ever, is that is not cruel. Well, I really don't know then what counts as cruel for you. But, so the question I want to ask, because I know that Paul is about to shut me down.
True.
Okay. Question I want to ask to Abdullah: would you be open to a possibility? I think I already know the answer, I'm afraid. That these punishments, described in strictly physical terms in the Quran, azab, shadid, terrible punishments, could be explained in symbolical or allegorical terms. St. Thomas Aquinas made the comment that the damned souls in hell do not suffer from physical aches and pains because they do not have a physical body. So they will suffer in a different way. So, question.
Okay. I think within Christianity, especially now, there's this tendency to basically, again, kind of not upset liberals and present a form of Christianity which is kind of, very liberal and, there's no punishments and there's no, people aren't physically hurt, they're only spiritually hurt. But then they say sometimes spiritual hurt is even more painful than physical hurt. Well, if that's the case, then I prefer physical hurt, right? So again, and you say that, we object to Guantanamo Bay because there is international treaties. Okay, it's a strange argument why we should object to Guantanamo Bay, but if that's the case, then we have a treaty with God who created us to worship Him, and we knew then the repercussions were given to us, and we broke that treaty, and hence it is not cruel, the punishment. And I just want to explain something to you. If someone took a pound from the pavement and ran off with it, for example, they don't deserve to get in prison for it. But if they were in prison for it, you'd call it cruel. But if someone stole £100 from your wallet and you called the police or whatever, and they could be in prison for it maybe for a few months anyway, but that wouldn't be cruel. So in one case it's cruel, in other cases it's not cruel. Why? Oh, because of the nature of the crime and the person. So all I'm saying is, if the person has rejected the very cause and maintain of his existence, then the penalty fits the crime.
Okay.
Do you want to comment on that?
Sure. Because I don't think that it's simply a rejection of the divine. For example, Buddhists, Christians, Catholics, so many people can look at reality and come through some type of idea, through whether it's intelligent design or just how phenomenal experiencing reality is, that there is a divine. But then when we talk about a 7th century Arabian dogma, or a 2,000-year-old dogma, and rituals that involve things in foreign languages and making circuits around the black cube and kissing the stone and going between Safa and Marwa and throwing rocks at a devil statue. This is a very that the divine is saying that if you reject this way of life, according to Allah is saying that if you reject this way of life, then you're bound to hell for eternity. And this is unanimous amongst all classical scholars of Sunni, that if you do not embrace the 7th century Arabian dogma, that you will be tortured. And what I'm saying is that nobody who perceives the world in their right minds would deny the truth knowingly that they're going to be punished for eternity, the way that the Quran describes the punishment.
Okay, brother, do you have a question for Farhan?
Yes.
Please do.
I hope I'm not misquoting you, but you said that somebody who knows they're going to go to hell, they wouldn't reject it. You mentioned Abu Jahl a few times. Now he heard all of these punishments that you quoted from the Quran, and he heard that they're forever. It's also narrated that he said that he believes what Muhammad, peace be upon him, saying is true. But him and his cronies also said to the Prophet that show us God, bring us a ladder down from heaven with a written signature that you're the Prophet of God, and even then we'll still reject you. So it's established that they heard all these threats, they heard this forever, they still believed what he was saying was true, and they said even if you show us God, we're still going to reject it. So after all that, do you not think that they deserve all those punishments in the Quran?
Well, I'm not familiar with why Abu Jahl rejected knowingly. Maybe he was accepting certain things that, and again, I would have to look at the hadith that comments on that issue. Maybe he was accepting certain things that the Prophet Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was saying, but the overall picture was something that he was denying. I seriously doubt that he knew that if he rejects Muhammad, that he would be tortured for eternity, that he would do so anyways. Again, I would have to look at the hadith to talk about it further, since I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, okay, Abdullah.
Okay. When I said that, I quoted a verse of the Quran which said that basically the people who are going into hell will be asked, did you not receive messengers? And this doesn't only include prophets of God, it includes any aspect of the truth that they received, which Allah willed for them to receive. So they will be made clear to them that there is the truth. Now maybe if they're living in the Amazon rainforest and they've never heard of Islam, this truth will just be, there's only one God. A Hanif, as they say in Islam, just a believer in one God. And maybe for someone else who might have encountered Islam but didn't have it properly presented to him, and he was told lies about it, and he was deceived, and he's a sincere person, then maybe he won't go to hell because Allah knows his situation. Allah will judge appropriately. But it's for the person who, knowing what the truth is, rejects it. It's a definition of kufr. You're burying the truth, as the origin of the term. You know the truth and you reject it. So the truth must be established. But I'll give you an example of someone, modern day example of someone who says something very interesting. There's this not so funny atheist comedian called Pat Condell on YouTube, and he put a video out once. He said, if it is true, if God does exist and there is a hell, then what I would do, I would go right in front of God, and I would, and basically he was going to insult God to his face. And how dare you make, create us in a world of suffering and whatever, and how dare you, and I don't, if I go to hell, that's fine, as long as I've, given him what for, and I'll tell him that he's put all these people in hell, take them out, and I'll go in. That's fine. God's unjust, and I will be happily do that into his face. So Pat Rendell said this by open testimony on his video. Now, maybe you could argue maybe he's lying, and maybe he's just joking. He says a lot of jokes, but this is what the kafir is on a parent. Maybe he could be guided, I don't know. But this is what a kafir would say. This is what a kafir is. They've chosen to define truth as they see it. And it's very easy to deny truth. For example, you might meet a woman who has a happy family, wonderful husband, nice kids, nice house, nice car, and then she discovers one day lipstick on his collar, which would indicate that he's sleeping around. And what would be the first response? She'd probably deny it to herself. Because her whole life would be shattered to believe that. It's such a horrific truth, such a painful and terrible truth, that the first response is denial. Again, anyone get a psychology book, read denial. They have tons of case studies you can read down there. But denial of the truth, that is the biggest no-no, and it does happen.
Okay. Question for Farhan, please. From you, gentlemen, sir? Yep.
I have a question from Mr. Qureshi, please. We've heard this evening, she's talking a lot about experience, about science. I want you just to answer me for this small experience. You got father and mom. If someone kill your father, and this morning time you will find his head in front of your house, you're gonna just, there is someone who got like a bad determinism, or you will call the police, you will call. What are you gonna do in this case?
Oh, I would certainly be emotional, there's no doubt about it. I would be emotional, I would
I'm
be
asking you,
distraught.
what are you gonna do in this case? You will call the police for the... But it's only determinism, sir.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I would, at least the teachings and the mystics and the teachers that I come across is that I've been trying to teach myself to forget that person who completely butchered my father, because they are a product of their circumstances. It would be hurtful, it would be an emotional state of affairs, but that's the reality of the situation, and it's something that Abdullah, the appeal to emotion, how that's a logical fallacy. That's something that I would have to instill within myself, and it's much harder and much more difficult to do. I agree with you. But I think the bigger question for you to think about is that, imagine if your father was not Muslim, or imagine all of these saintly and beautiful people that you see, and you see them in that situation in hell, where they're being tortured. How would you feel? That's a question that you need to ask, I think, yourself.
Okay. Just very briefly, I want to answer something related to that question. Basically, I suppose what the Thomists would say is you put the murderer or the criminal in a prison to separate them from society, and it's not their fault, but they should be separate to protect society. But, okay, all right, fine. But what if there's a petty thief and there is a murderer, and you put them both in prison, but the murderer rehabilitates quicker than the petty thief who just stole 100 quid? You'll see a situation where petty thieves will stay in prison longer than murderers. That could happen, So it sounds absurd. It sounds counterintuitive to our sense of justice, but this is what determinism will kind of lead to, and it doesn't make sense from that kind of sense, from that perspective.
Okay. So we've got a question for Abdullah. Why are all our hands going down? Someone must have a question. It's just you, Father Frank.
Well, ask me a question you want me to answer or elaborate on.
Okay. Come on, someone must have a question. Sisters at the back. Question for Abdullah. Okay. All right, yes, sir.
Oh, no, I thought you were about to say...
No, jumping the gun. You could read my naps and you knew that in 3 seconds' time I would say a certain thing, which is what you anticipated. The gentleman in the green, pale green top. Oh, you're very kind, sir.
Just one thing. When you said that letting a sinner out of hell is like letting an unreformed criminal out of jail, I don't really see how that works, because I think it's a disanalogy actually, because if you let a criminal out of jail, they can go back into the world and reoffend. Once you're in the afterlife, whatever you think of it, and you're in hell, you can't go back out into the world and reoffend.
I didn't say letting a sinner out of hell. I said letting a rejecter of truth out of hell. Not a sinner. Sinners will be let out of hell after after time served. But there's an endful meaning in what you're saying. It's an assumption that crime and punishment is just based on separating people from society, like Farhan was probably suggesting, as a system of crime and punishment, and not as crime and punishment to exact justice. So a person who is basically a murderer deserves life imprisonment according to most systems, but they usually get let out anyway. And what if you were to let them come out of prison unreformed? Then justice wouldn't have been served. The family of the victim that he killed will not think, "Oh, we're so upset he got let out because he might harm society." No, they'll generally say, "What about our little boy who he killed? Where's his justice? How can they let this monster out?" This is what they'll say. It's a natural, intuitive justice. It's just to say that basically in afterlife, why would anyone come out? Why would anyone be staying in hell if they have to be kind of protected from society or society protected from them? It's silly, because I don't believe in that model of justice. Only maybe a social Darwinist might, or whatever. But you must separate people from society, and that's the reason why you have prisons.
If you really do put that much faith in justice in hell, then surely justice on earth, or a criminal justice system, is just completely superfluous to that. And that isn't even the Muslim position. If hell is that just, why have, for example, the hood punishments, aren't they, for adultery, for anything like that? Clearly that highlights that justice in hell alone is not enough. So I don't see why you're kind of denigrating any kind of criminal justice system. I think it's needed to maintain law and order here.
I totally agree, but I don't. I think you misunderstood an Islamic concept. If you get punished here, you don't get punished in the afterlife. We know about the hudud punishments mostly from Muslims who came to the Prophet Muhammad and confessed them voluntarily and said, "Please punish us here. We don't want to get the punishment in the afterlife." So there's a theological continuity to that. And secondly is that we want to create a society in the world which is free from oppression and all these negative factors that corrupts people's nafs. Yeah, this is part of Allah's mercy. So we must keep society free from criminals to roam around and oppress people.
Sure, and I totally agree with you that what's needed for that is a belief in free will. Because if you go down the kind of extreme form of determinism that Farhad is suggesting, there'd be no responsibility. You would just say, "Oh, this is caused by structures, by somebody's genetics, by their upbringing," which clearly that would just be completely destroy any form of law and order on them.
Right. Thank you. Time is pressing upon us. I'm going to make a few executive decisions here. Farhan is very keen to respond, which is great. I'm going to limit it just to 2 minutes, sorry. Okay. Then one final question for Farhan from the wonderful audience that you are, and then that is it for the Q&A, and we're going to have summings up, otherwise we will be marched out of here without having concluded our matters in 9 minutes. That's how it works here. So Farhan, a couple more minutes please, and then one more question from someone for Farhan, and then we'll have the 2 summings up, and then that's over. Thank you.
I think there was so much that I wasn't able to cover, but I'll try to do it really quickly in 2 minutes. First and foremost, in terms of your question about the person coming out of jail and committing, again, that's determinism, right? They were kind of determined. They have this innate disposition to do the harm. That's why when they're let go out of jail prematurely, they're going to do the same thing. Brother Abdullah gave the example of the kuffar pleading in hell that if they let them out, they would still do the same thing. Hence determinism there. And how can there be determinism and there be justice at the same time? If a person's gonna, even if Allah gives them another chance, they're kind of determined to do that. Another thing, a big scope that I didn't bring up is the hadith of Muhammad, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ, that deeds or actions are judged by intentions. So now every terrible criminal sin that you can do, what is your niyyah behind it? Right? And that brings up a whole new concern. And then Hamid al-Ghazali, or not Hamid, the Ashari school of thought, because it's compatibilist, it says that Allah creates the action through the person's intention. So if Allah creates the action through the intention, and that's how it comes about, then what? Then how can it possibly be that deeds and actions are judged by niyyah? There's a contradiction there, and so that's a whole different aspect of justice and punishment and consequence and retribution that I wasn't able to cover.
Thank you, Farhan. Right, but very last, the good doctor there, Rohan.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. I found it a bit surprising that someone as intelligent as Farhad would advocate, and a free thinker would advocate blind following of scientists or anyone for that matter. And if determinism is true, then didn't your scientists arrive at this consensus that you are just to follow in a deterministic manner outside their conscious control? And how then do we know that it's true? Where's your proof that determinism produces true statements?
Okay, maybe could you repeat the question one more time? So I think I got the second half of it.
If determinism is true, then we scientists who you say have a consensus that there is no free will or soul or whatever, or the materialist consensus, didn't they arrive at this consensus in a deterministic manner, outside their control? It's not in their conscious control. How do you know it's true? So where's your evidence that determinism produces true scientific rational statements?
Okay. So there's two statements here. First of all, my appeal to the layman to accept scientific facts. As the biologist, chemist, physicist, psychologist, do the experiments, have the knowledge, have studied the material that we have not studied. What I said is you can look at it similar to taqleed, and if you think taqleed is blind following, then that's your definition of taqleed. And that was my analogy. The second half of the statement in terms of the proof for determining, there's no proof for free will either. None whatsoever. Empirically, philosophically, you can argue it, but empirically there's no evidence for free will. But additionally, within determinism, there is soft determinism, there is compatibilism, which means that everything is cause. There's causality. That's the definition of determinism, right? That the current state of affairs depends on antecedent causal factors. That there's a chain of causation there, and that's the evidence. That's deductive reasoning for you, for determinism. Now, if there is some randomness, some evitability, some freedom within the context of that determinism, that's totally possible, and I am a compatibilist in that regard.
Thank you very much for that very intelligent question. We now come to that part where I invite the speakers to give 2 minutes summaries. Sorry, it's been reduced from 5 minutes to 2 minutes for reasons I've already mentioned earlier on. So I'll ask Abdullah to start with 2 minutes, and I will be timing it fairly ruthlessly. Oh, you're going last? Okay, fine. Do you want to have 2 minutes now?
Oh, is this the conclusion?
This conclusion, just 2 minutes, I'm afraid, because we've run out of time.
Okay. Since I went first, can he do his conclusion first?
Okay. Okay. I'm going to be fairly ruthless. I do apologise in advance for being ruthless, but here we go. 2 minutes.
All right, I'll be very brief. I said in my presentation, I quote, "Sin is the value of intentions behind the action, not the action itself." So I don't know why I was caught up on intentions and why that should complicate my position. Actions are by intention. If you intend to kill someone for a bad action, if you intend to kill someone for a bad action, so that was determined. If you intend to kill someone for a bad action,
it's not my fault because it was determined.
Right. Yeah. So I don't see how intentions cause problems. God's foreknowledge. I've never seen any problem with God's foreknowledge of what you're going to do with your free will to be any kind of limit to your free will. So I don't see that. So people in hell, God knows what they're going to do. But more importantly, God knows their state. So God knows the state of their soul now. The state of their soul now, they've made themselves into rejectors of truth. Now, I would say, in answer to the doctor's question, that the neuroscientists, yes, they were determined. They were determined by their materialistic bias to come to the conclusion that there must be a materialistic explanation to the experiments they looked at. But other people, who even some of them are materialists as well, do not come to that conclusion. Now anyway, I'm going to wrap up. I think, all in all, I still maintain my objection that the only real problem with the problem of hell is people don't like it. It's a bad. They think it's a very painful concept, a horrific concept to imagine you being there. But this is emotional, and I would put it to Farhan that I know. I mean, I'm not trying to impugn any of your sincerity. And I think that you do try to look for the truth, and that's a great thing. But I would say that maybe there is a deterministic factor that your parents were not Muslim. You have a natural empathy for all human beings. And this naturally led you to a conclusion, not based on a rational basis, but based on an emotional basis. that hell is unjust. And I would say that if you look at the facts, if you look at the reality in the universe itself, hell is very much just when you consider the true import and nature of reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Abdullah, and Farhan to have his 2 minutes as well.
Paul kind of knocked the mic over and he said, "Oh, that was determined." Yeah, that was laws of physics, definitely determined to be that way. But okay, coming back to the emotional piece, yes, I do agree with Abdullah that it was partially emotional, and I think emotions matter. I think experiences matter. I think the very essence of spirituality is our experiences. Philosophy is mental gymnastics, the conjecture, the conceptualization. That's all that it is, concepts, right, in our mind. Science is the mechanics of what's going on, and spirituality is the actual experience of reality as we know it, and emotions are tied into that. So I'm not going to deny the fact that, yeah, it was about my parents, but it wasn't just about my parents. It was also because I've worked in mental health for the past 4 years. I've seen countless amounts of suffering in innocent children. Countless amount of suffering, and it's so hard for them to get out of that vicious cycle. And we try and we try and we try, and they still relapse and they still relapse and they still relapse, and it's devastating and disturbing and saddening to see that. So is it emotional? Partially, absolutely. But I didn't come to this fact and apostate from Islam until I studied psychology, until I got my education and learned what determinism is factually. So through empiricism, through deductive reasoning, I combined that with the emotional experience, and I came to a reality that I'm following today. And I realized that I was attached to my identity as a Muslim, that had positive spiritual experiences as a Muslim, just as Christians have positive spiritual experiences, and atheists have positive spiritual experiences, and I became attached to my identity. So attached that it was difficult for me to see outside of the box. But it was through studying empirical evidence, not emotional issues, that I realized that this 7th century way of looking at reality is limited to just that. That the purpose of life is not just fun and games, but it's to grow, it's to evolve, and that's what we are doing individually. That's what we as a human civilization are doing collectively, and we need to grow past dogmatic, ancient traditions. Not completely abandon them, because there's a ton of wisdom in there, but there's a broader reality, there's broader knowledge that's available to us. Now, how much time do I have?
You've run out.
Oh.
I'm very sorry. Just 30 seconds of your time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to both of our speakers and everyone for attending this event this evening. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I hope we've all gained some benefit in terms of knowledge and understanding. If you enjoyed this event and would like to see more, please help MDI to continue its work by making a donation in the donation bins at the back. The next MDI debate will be tomorrow evening at 6:30 on the problem of evil. The event will be held in Toynbee Hall, 28 Commercial Street in London. The nearest tube is Aldgate East. For more information, visit our website www.thedebateinitiative.com. And if you haven't already done so, please put your email address on our mailing list at the back to receive updates on our upcoming events over the year. Thank you and good night. Assalamu alaikum.